Hello, Michael Bull here with America's Commercial Real Estate. We're at the 2018 Realtors Land Institute Annual Conference in Nashville. We have Jim Murrett here. Jim is the 2018 president of the Appraisal Institute. And Jim, you just came from a speech where you talked to the attendees here about environmental concerns and appraisals. And I think that's a concern for everyone. What was the most major point that came out of it that you think realtors and people in general should be aware of?
Well, first of all, thank you, Michael, for having me here. It's an honor to represent the Appraisal Institute at this function. But yes, you're right. I mean, one of the biggest things is that appraisers have to work together with realtors and with sellers of property to understand, are there environmental concerns in a particular property? And the main point that I was making today was, what is the role of the appraiser in the transaction, in the assignment?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because it seems like when I read appraisals, it's kind of just blocked out. There's no environmental concerns here, or there might be some concerns, but we're not including it in this appraisal. But there's a bit more responsibility of the appraiser to look into it, right?
Well, the appraiser has to be aware of the fact is there a potential environmental concern? Mm-hmm. It's not the appraiser's expertise to fully understand what the actual impact is of that impairment, but the fact is, if they see black bubbly stuff oozing out of the ground, they have to be astute enough and competent enough to contact the client to say, hey, I think we have an issue here. Yeah. The other thing is that an appraiser really has to understand what is the prior uses of the property. Mm-hmm. Is that conducive to a use that could have some environmental contamination, such as a dry cleaner, a former gas station, even a nail salon to that degree.
Yeah, and there's some places that you can look up some basic things, right, to see if it's a contaminated site itself or nearby, right?
Well, certainly there are Superfund sites that are published through many different public websites. Then, of course, you can work with the local assessor to look at what the prior uses of the property were. Mm-hmm. So there are public records, absolutely. It is not appropriate for an appraiser just simply to wash their hands and say, I don't know. Right. There is a minimal amount of due diligence that an appraiser should do and must do to be able to tell if there's any potential environmental issues, especially when we're talking rural appraisals, which is what this conference is, farmland. Mm-hmm. What did the farmer use? Is it crops where they used a lot of fertilizers? Was it just simply cattle or that type of a thing where they had just feed? So.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because we saw a lot of land in town and in-town areas, and we rarely think of things like that. We're thinking of petroleum products, right, and groundwater contamination and things. But, well, let me ask you this on commercial appraisals. What has changed most recently regarding commercial appraisals?
Well, there's two things that I probably want to mention. Is one, now there is the federal de minimis level is being contemplated to being raised, and this is for federally related transactions through the banking world, where the federal de minimis level is on real estate loans is contemplated being increased from $250,000 to $400,000, and there's a rumor, so to speak, that it will go to $500,000. So what this means is for the transactions below that amount, a licensed and certified appraiser is not needed and an appraisal is not needed. Now, an evaluation has to be ordered, but that is something that can be done by a non-appraiser. The other thing in the commercial real estate world is the market sustainable for what's going on out there? Cap rates be getting at all-time lows, foreign money coming into the United States. Certainly our president is an economist. He's looking to invigorate the marketplace, and it's working to a certain degree. And the fact is, how is that going to, from a long-term sustainability standpoint, being able to hold up?
And let's go back for a moment on the minimum, I guess, purchase price or loans that the banks are doing. So they may be able to now, any loan under $400,000 not order an appraisal and just an evaluation. What's the definition of that evaluation?
Well, an evaluation is a banking term, and there's about 7 or 8 criteria that must be in an evaluation, but they are very minimal in terms of a scope of work. And it's just a matter of show your work and be competent to do it. It would be ideal for an appraiser to do evaluations, but there are some states that do not allow appraisers to do evaluations because they feel that they are less than what the uniform standards of professional appraisal practice allow. The Appraisal Foundation feels that appraisers can do evaluations, and I generally agree with them, but I also disagree because USPAP still requires you to do a few more things than the evaluation calls for. We are hopefully working with the Appraisal Foundation to make some changes and alterations to USPAP to allow appraisers to do evaluations, because I think the marketplace and public trust is better served if a knowledgeable appraiser is doing these lesser scope of work assignments than someone who's not even licensed, who has they're not beholden to anyone in terms of their ethics or their standards.
So who can do the evaluations?
Non-appraisers.
Anyone?
Could be a broker, could be anyone off the street. It's just, seriously, I mean, so there are no limitations as to who can do it, other than there is a caveat in the evaluation that says the person must be competent in that type of work. So there is a little bit there, but it isn't like there's a sector of the market that is geared toward the evaluation.
Okay, excellent. And then let's now go back to what you mentioned about future values and future cap rates and things, because we all know when we see appraisal, it's as of this date, here's the value, because things can change almost overnight at times. So there's a responsibility for an appraiser as well to kind of look forward a little bit of what might happen down the road with cap rates and interest rates economy.
Well, certainly in commercial real estate, the theory of anticipation is the lifeblood of commercial real estate. Yeah. People don't buy necessarily what happened today and in the past. They certainly take that into consideration, but many times commercial real estate is the present value of future benefits. So they're going to forecast forward what they think they can do with the property, present value back to today. So that's a matter of, in a way, guesstimating, forecasting what's going to happen in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Depending on the property type, that might be rather easy if there's leases in place. But if it's an owner-occupied property or a to-be-constructed property, feasibility comes into play, risk comes into play.
Yeah. So were all the appraisers then around the country when President Trump was elected say, oh no, now how are we going to know what's going on?
More so than not,
Yeah.
I think so,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of investors were also very, very pleased,
Yeah.
and especially with tax law changes.
Yeah.
There's a lot more money available now for investing than there was 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, if you will. What are your thoughts moving forward? So if you mentioned that cap rates are a little low, maybe some of the markets are fairly frothy. I assume you expect interest rates to rise. What do you expect for rate increases for commercial mortgages for properties, and I guess as you're doing these assumptions, and corresponding cap rates?
Well, being a conservative banker over the years prior to joining Collier's valuation, I certainly took the conservative route and said, yes, it's probable that interest rates will slightly rise. Any increase in interest rates are going to slow down a depression of cap rates. To what degree? It depends on the property type. It depends on supply and demand. However, I think it's pretty safe to say that anything from a 50 to a 75 basis point increase in rates is not out of the realm of a probability.
In what time period? A year? Or?
Well, I mean, I think people were talking about this a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
So I think 2018 is pretty safe. A lot of it has to do with the new Fed chair, but I believe that it'll be into 2019. But I'm not an economist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None of us are. But you mentioned that appraisers have to kind of look at the future and the economy and the market and what might happen to a property and its value. So we do all have to look forward. So maybe that's why so many appraisers are listening to the Commercial Real Estate Show. They do reach out to us.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that appraisers read the market. We don't create the market. But the way we read the market is to get involved, talk to the brokers, talk to the participants in the marketplace, try and get into the mind of the investor. Why did you pay that amount for that property? And the investor says, well, because I think that the stock market's going to increase. I think that tax laws are going to change. And that's the appraisers reading the market. That's where an appraiser value adds themselves, when they can be entrenched into an actual transaction and understand it, versus just seeing that there's a number on a piece of paper and that correlates to X amount of dollars per square foot.
You know, that sounds so smart for a commercial appraiser to interview the purchaser to see what he's thinking or what he might be doing with the property and his expectations, but that seems a little bit more than I would think typically happens. You know, it seems like there's maybe a little distance between the purchaser and the appraiser.
Well, many times an appraiser, not many times, an appraiser has to verify a sales transaction. And it's through a knowledgeable party. Maybe it's through the realtor. So maybe you don't be able to get to the purchaser, but you can get to their broker who understands what they were thinking. Because the broker generally understands what the appraiser is going through. In a perfect world, you are going to be interviewing the seller or the purchaser. But in reality, that's too good on textbooks. It doesn't happen all the time in reality. And you just got to keep pushing. You're told no 9 times, but that 10th time you're told yes, and you get the story. That's fantastic. But that's why you go to the Chamber of Commerce breakfasts and you get to know these people. And you go to different sessions where people are talking, investors are talking about what they're thinking. Maybe you don't have a one-on-one with you, but they have a group session as to what an investment group might be thinking.
Yeah, well, that's good information. Jim, thanks for being with us, and thanks for being at the Institute conference here.
Again, Michael, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.